Hi, I'm Amber.
And hi, I'm Brenda, and this is the Minority Millennial Money Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Minority Millennial Money. Today, we want to talk about emergency funds, and we'll also talk about cars a little bit because they are liabilities that a lot of people consider maybe luxury expenses or things that sometimes we want and don't need. And then we'll talk about leasing versus buying, just like renting versus owning. So, Amber, why don't you tell me what an emergency fund is?
Sure. So I think probably the first step you should take if you are wanting to get out of debt and to accumulate wealth is to definitely have an emergency fund. Basically, what these funds are, they're liquid funds, so like a savings account. That you put funds into in case of emergency. So if you were to lose your job, if your car breaks down, if you get into some sort of catastrophic accident, you will have funds to use so that you don't have to, take out a loan or otherwise. So that's basically the purpose of an emergency fund.
Okay. And why do why should I not just keep paying off debt? Like if I had $10,000 of credit card debt and it has like a 29% interest rate, like why wouldn't I just pay that off quicker and use like I probably need like $6,000 in an emergency fund. Why wouldn't I just throw those $6,000 at my debt?
I think it's definitely a personal choice. I think it's an emotional one. Personally, I feel like an emergency fund should be built up prior to paying off debt, just because if you have another accident, you're just adding to your credit card debt anyway. So it just makes more sense to me to have a couple, months of cushion
Right.
prior to paying off that debt. But I mean, the order of which you pay off debt, build wealth, invest, put money into your retirement. I mean, everybody has a different idea of what they think they should do.
Right. So I we've talked about this in the real estate episode, but I have emergency funds for myself, for each property that I rent out. And then when I had a high deductible health plan, I maxed out the HSA for that. And we can talk about healthcare in another episode, but in a sense, the HSA is a bit of an emergency fund for your health plan because, like you said, you may have an accident, right? And like as we know, like health insurance is not great unless you work for a huge company that has really great health insurance, and even they don't have great health insurance anymore these days. So you need to have an emergency fund to cover something that would happen like that. And maybe you're a person who has a chronic illness, or you go to the doctor very frequently for a routine medication, and every time it's like $100. So either you build that into your budget or you have a fund separate for like medical expenses. And then neither of us have children, but kids have accidents too and they get sick. And also you may have to take time off of work when family members are ill. So you need money to cover the expenses of taking time off work if you don't have enough PTO or you don't have more savings, right?
Yeah, so a couple of things I think you hit on. First, a high deductible health plan. So some people may not know what that is. So a high deductible health plan is usually like the government sponsored plans, like what was called Obamacare. I think it's now Biden Care. Or sometimes with your job, they will give you the option of basically having a health plan that doesn't kick in until usually like $10,000. I think is typically it could vary depending on your
It
plan.
can vary. I've had one that's like 5,000, and preventative care is usually covered. I think by law they have to cover preventative care.
Oh, okay, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to get into a car accident, let's say, and you have $15,000 in medical bills, you'd have to pay whatever your deductible is. So $5,000 or $10,000. You'd have to pay that in order to get your health plan to cover the rest of your accident. So that's huge. So I would suggest definitely at the very least having your deductible in an emergency fund. The second thing you said that I think is super important too, and I remember when I worked for the federal government, there was no maternity leave program that you like. So if you had a baby or got pregnant, they were not going to pay you any money during the maternity leave. And this is for the federal government. And I was really nervous about that because as women, I know I always get nervous about what if I get sexually assaulted? What if, you know what I'm saying? What if somehow I'm pregnant and now I have to foot the bill for weeks of
the pregnancy.
Exactly. And weeks of
the delivery.
Yeah. So
I know. So I've had a couple friends on Twitter who have had children and have learned different ways to like not work the system, but found out things after the fact, like after they had a delivery. And I've heard things like having to pay $4,000 to $5,000 for a normal vaginal delivery for people who are insured, right? Like this isn't, and for some reason in my head, because I've never been pregnant, I was like, oh, it's probably like $500. So, I mean, for those of y'all that are listening that are women, like definitely consider that as part of your emergency fund. And I think something we haven't covered yet is how much, right? Like, okay, so we've talked about all these things, like maybe the amount of your high deductible health plan deductible. For me personally, I have about 3 months of expenses, of living expenses saved, which this goes back to the budgeting episode about knowing how much you spend every month, right? Like you can't have a set amount emergency fund if you don't know how much you really need to live on. Obviously, if I'm completely unemployed, I'm not going to be going out. I'm not going to be probably getting my nails done or, you know, doing anything special, like really the bare bones and enough to like buy food and get gas, and then multiply that by, people say 3 to 6 months. I'm a nurse, so I think work would be very easy to find. So I do 3, but if you're in a field where it's more difficult to find a job, probably closer to 6, if not more. Would you agree?
I agree. I mean, right now I have a few jobs, so I'm not really nervous about being unemployed, but I do have like 4 or 5 months in an emergency fund. But it just really varies. And I also know that like push come to shove, I do have some credit cards that are like lower interest that I could use, or I can get a low interest credit line or something like that. So I think 4 to 5 months is a sweet spot for me. But I think if like you have no credit, if you have no, you know, you don't know if your job, like some people that are in private practice or work for companies that maybe are like startups, where you don't have that sort of job security. I work for the government. So it's a little bit different, but if you know that you don't have job security, you may want 6 to 8 months of an emergency fund. I think you have to just determine how long would it take you to find a job if you were if you, for some reason you got let go or laid off.
Right. Or maybe you had to stop working because your mother or father got very ill, right? Like, I know that has happened to people and there's no social safety net for that. So you have to be your own safety net. And I think that's the whole point of the emergency fund, right? Is to be able to say, I'm okay because I have this little pot of money that's there for really rainy days, right? Like, and I will say I have been tempted, as one does, to use that money for like a splurge, but that's not what it's for. A splurge should be saved up for, right? So just be careful on how it should be liquid, so you should be able to access it easily, but it should not be like in your checking account. Agreed. I would say.
And that brings up a good point. Like, I think you need a high yield savings account to put the money in. I think we've talked about high yield savings accounts before, but I know me and Brenda, we both have high yield savings accounts. And typically when things are going well, there's like 2% interest usually. 2 to 2.
Yeah, I think it was almost 2.5 before the pandemic. And then when the pandemic hit, they went down a lot. So it's maybe down to 0.5 now.
Yes. But usually, you know, when we're not in a global health pandemic, you know, you're getting 2.5% interest on that money. So you're not losing as much with inflation by keeping it in a high deductible health or high deductible, by keeping a high yield savings account. So that's what I would suggest.
I use Wealthfront, but there's lots of banks that will offer. Just make sure that you're not putting it in a regular savings account. It's different. It's a high yield savings account, and there's no restrictions on like how long you can or how often you can pull the money. But like for me, it takes like 2 days to get the money, right? So it's not like your savings account at your bank where you can just go pull it out really quickly. And maybe because Wealthfront is an online bank, but um just make sure that it's accessible, but not so accessible that you're at risk of spending it.
Yes, so I have Discover Bank. I have their checking and their savings, and their savings is high yield. So mine is accessible at all times. So I could
Oh, that's
take
nice.
out all the money now, and it would immediately go to my checking account, and I can go make a purchase if I needed to within minutes.
Nice.
So I highly
Right.
suggest
Like
Discover.
if you have a flat tire and it needs to get changed right then and there, and it's $200, then you can cover it, right? That's what it's good to have access to. Or maybe you had to put that on credit, but you can pay it off right away.
True.
So let's transition a little bit to cars, because right before we started this, we were talking about leasing cars, and I don't lease. I have leased in the past. I own 2 luxury cars in my 20s. One of them was a purchase, one of them was a lease, and I regret both. I threw a lot of money at cars I didn't need. But they were fun, they were fun to drive, and they gave me some problems. So when I decided to pursue fire, I turned in the lease early and I lost money on that. But I knew that I wanted to buy something reliable that I could pay off like within a year to a year and a half, so that I could really just like slash all my debt. So it was like just like a debt payoff mission. And I still have that car. So I'm going on 3 years with that car. And I told you recently I had to put $500 into it because like it has high mileage now, and it needed new spark plugs and it needed a new battery. So I was going to go on a road trip, and I didn't want to be like stuck out in the middle of nowhere with a dead battery.
Right.
So I've invested a little bit into the car, but I've also had it paid off for a year and a half. So it's been a year and a half that I haven't had a payment, which is really nice. And I love cars. And so like occasionally I'll go check some out and I'm like, oh, I would really want this. But the freedom of not having a payment is really great. But you have a payment. So tell me about that.
I do. So I actually really enjoy leasing cars. I'm just not really a car person. I'm a single female. I have no idea about cars. I know zero. I don't even get car washes. I do nothing. So for me, I can't not handle the ownership responsibilities of having a car. I don't want to get new spark plugs. Like I don't want to get new tires. I don't want to do any of it. Like I don't want to spend 1 second more looking at the car, dealing with the car, thinking about the car, nothing. So I lease a new car every 3 years. The payments are usually like $200 to $300 a month. And then basically, if anything's wrong with it, it's a new car. So basically nothing's wrong with it in those 3 years. But if anything happens, like a recall or something like that, I just take it to the dealer.
Right.
They do everything for free. And then they give me a loaner car. And that's basically it. So all I'm paying for is gas and oil changes, which there's like a mileage limit usually when you lease a car. So there's not that many oil changes because you're not putting a lot of miles on it.
Yeah.
So
See, I do drive a lot. So like for me, leasing is expensive because I have to pay to like get at least 15,000 miles a year. So I mean, I might try it again. I'm not against it, but I get like now that you're talking about all the perks, I'm like, I've had to get tires, spark plugs, a battery, multiple things.
And the thing is, like, I talk about this in my book too, it's just like unforeseen costs. I really hate those. So like if every month I have a budget of what I'm going to spend, I don't want to spend $1 more if it's not on something I want. So
right.
If my car, I need new tires and I have to all of a sudden pay hundreds of dollars, it's like, no, thank you. I want to be able to jump in my car, drive it, leave it.
Right.
But I don't drive a lot. So like I've never gone over 12,000 miles in 3 years or every year.
Okay. Well, that's good. See, my fear is like going over. And for some reason that gives me way more anxiety than just like having to pay for new tires. But anyway, we can maybe like people who are listening can talk to us about whether they own or they lease. I know like on Twitter, like personal finance people are like, never lease a car, you know, like it's just throwing away money. And I'm like, oh, you're always going to have a transportation expense, right? Like, so it's just a matter of how you want to throw away the money.
I mean, I spend like a couple $1,000s a year on my car, and that's usually what people
That's
spend on
true.
cars when they pay them off.
Keeping up maintenance. Yeah.
So it's like, why would you ever have a used car at that point, or an old car when you
True.
could have a new one?
See, the thing with me is though, like if I were to lease, I'd probably lease like a Mercedes or something like higher end. It's not going to be $200 a month.
I see. I lease cheap cars. Like I like Hyundai, like Kia. Like
yeah, so my current car is a Hyundai and it's great. Like it does everything I need it to do. It's paid off. So that's why I'm okay with it being a Hyundai.
Fair. I just don't like cars, I think. I don't care.
You just what?
I just don't like cars. Like everyone's like, you should get a BMW. I'm like, for what? Like I hate cars.
You don't like them. It's different when you like them.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, so let's wrap this up. If anybody has any questions about emergency funds, let us know. Let us know if you know of any high yield savings accounts that have a higher interest rate.
Yes.
Y'all take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.